I think one of the biggest problems for a trainee designer is having something to design. Is to have. I don't like the word content because it becomes very generic. But you need some material to work with, to get your teeth into, to kind of express. And that's one of the reasons that I love magazines. Simply is that they are about the very nature is that there's something that needs to be communicated. And you can collaborate on that, and you should, as a designer, have the opportunity to input and collaborate at that very early stage, which isn't always the case in graphic 2D and 3D design. Is quite often a finished thing is presented to the designer, who then has to come up with the system of visual communication around it, and they haven't really been involved in not just in the decision making, but they haven't even been able to observe the decision making.
So there is something fundamental when we think about the profession of a graphic designer. There is something fundamental in kind of communicating something that maybe doesn't come from them. I don't know. It's just a really interesting creative position because it's not a usual one.
I mean, I think we're sort of staring down the history of graphic design here, but I mean, graphic design started as a sort of it was a trade that people were brought in to help define the best way to use the printing machine. Really, there was a choice of typeface and there was a choice of color, and maybe the choice of the paper, but there wasn't an awful lot more to it than that. And then it's got increasingly sophisticated. Today we talk about designer as author, and there is a big sort of there's a will within the design industry to control the message as well as the expression, which I think is really healthy, but it's not always the case, and that's something. I mean, it's something in a way. It's the sort of maturing of the profession, to start actually addressing what is design and how do we design. How do we respond to the stuff that we're meant to be presenting, and can we be the people that are coming up with the ideas that we're presenting?
And so I think often these maturing of a profession or a craft, or how we decide to call it, is actually visible in education. So it's interesting that we started in education. You've taught as well over the years. Can you see a kind of evolution from the time when you were studying, if I'm correct, printing was the way that the profession was framed as, to now communication? What do you observe in that evolution?
I think I've always found myself straddling two quite distinct areas. One is graphic design and one is magazine design. And certainly as I was, when I was studying and when I was learning about graphic design, the world of editorial design was rather looked down upon. It wasn't. It was a commercial. It was too commercial. It was too. I think it's too much to say that it wasn't regarded as design, but it was very much over there. And the practice of graphic design was more to do with a pure approach to typography, and a sort of it was a different world. It was just the two were very very separate. And I love graphic design, and but I have a very conflicting relationship with graphic design. I think sometimes it gets to be just over important, and yet at the same time I also think, I mean, the practitioners and the way it's regarded within the industry can be full of self-importance. But at the same time, I really regret that there isn't a proper respect in the wider public for what graphic designers do. So I'm sort of there's various different poles that I'm attracted to there in terms of, I think it should be taken more seriously in the wider world, but I think sometimes the world of graphics itself takes itself far too seriously. And I think perhaps that's why it isn't regarded so seriously beyond the world of graphic design itself. It's quite a closed thing. It's not open. What I love about magazines is that opens up, is that is much more somehow because the design work that goes into a magazine is so integral to that magazine. The reader, the customer, the person that experiences the magazine can't often tell the difference between what they're reading and what they're reading in terms of words and what they're reading in terms of design.
But then part of this kind of opens up different paths in which we can go, but I guess part of the experience of the magazine is the design, right? So I think that there is a kind of certain enjoyment in sometimes not even reading the words.
But I think there's a very particular way that you read a magazine, and it's not necessarily simply reading words as you might in the book. It's you're reading a more complex sort of sense of visual language of word and image and design decision making, and all of these things come into play. And that's one of the things that I really enjoy about not just doing it but seeing it and observing editorial or specifically magazine design is the way that the same story can be told in so many different ways by presenting it in a different manner, and can be absolutely, it can change the way you approach the text in every sense, and it can completely switch your point of view from being positive to negative to happy to sad. It changes the reading completely. So there is a very particular process that the mind and the reader goes through in reading a magazine. And I see lots of people flicking through magazines and they would regard themselves as reading the magazine, but it's a completely different experience to watching someone reading a book.
But is it okay to flick through a magazine? Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. But as far as that's the experience. And then you stop at stuff and you flick and you go back and you go, we as magazine makers, we put a lot of time into flat planning the thing and making it run well and making it kind of give it a sense of pace and variation from page to page, from story to story, most of which is immediately destroyed by the reader, who doesn't start at the beginning and go through pages 2, 3, 4 to 100, whatever. They're in and out and roundabout, and it's sort of, they navigate it in a very kind of free-fall manner. But that's magazines. That's how people engage with them, and then they go back and maybe read it properly.
Maybe before we talk about magazine and magazine culture and magazine cultures, I'd like to stay on this subject of designer or editor, and your kind of observation of the kind of evolving, changing world of magazine editorial practices, design practices. Do you think that perhaps this is being redefined now, what design means, what graphic design means? I recently spoke to Rory and Ollie from OKRM, and they were talking as kind of, I guess they were challenging the notion of what actually a designer does. They were a lot more interested in collaboration and kind of intellectual conversation with a client. And developing not only the kind of language, the visual language, but developing clients' practice. So do you see any movement in that sense that maybe is kind of reflecting also in the way magazines are now evolving?
I think there's a lot of movement. I think things like in so many areas of activity, things are much more open and pluralist now. It's not really the case that there is a really, this is how you do it. It is about. One of great things about magazines is collaboration, and is working together, and it is the idea of the third mind, and this is sort of the idea of greater than the sum of the parts. But it goes somewhere you're not expecting. It might not always sit 100% comfortably with you as a designer, but you're contributing to this process. It's probably not sitting 100% purely with the editor either, but you've come up with something which is a sort of fusing of the two of you. I've always been interested in that, and I think that's one of the kind of magic things about magazines anyway, is this idea of collaboration, and that you can teach the people you're working with, and they can teach maybe is the wrong word. You can influence and help people develop their ideas. So there's always been that kind of sense of collaboration, that sense of changing by working with people. That's part of it, definitely. I think you see that more and more now. I mean, there's so many issues around. One of the things that I find particularly, one thing I find frustrating at the moment, design-wise, is there's quite a lot of people making magazines and not taking design that seriously. Insofar as maybe they've got some great editorial direction and a sense of purpose in terms of what they wish to do in publishing, but when it comes to it, they either haven't brought in a designer, or they thought they can do the design themselves, or maybe it's simply an issue of finance and money. So there are a tranche of magazines that are quite loosely designed, quite limited in their design ambition. Whereas, I do prefer, as coming at it from the point of view of a designer myself, I expect design to be more present, more, there is a, but to go back to your question, I think it's a very open, there's not just like, the way to do it. There are ways, there are multiple ways, and you can go in different directions, and they, to some degree, a certain direction will mark out what you're doing as being in that direction. But equally, I think things cross-pollinate, and in a sense, I look at so many magazines and think not so much of the individual magazines, but this is the big collection of magazines, and they're all going in different directions, but there's a more sort of, amongst them all, there is a kind of general movement towards something, and they're all influencing each other.
And what is that thing that you see them moving towards now?
I think it's very hard to tell. It's a bit like the the sort of open questions around technology and AI, and what is it going to be? It's going to be what it is, to an extent. You know what I mean? It's not easily readable as it's going off there. There are different directions. There are different things happening. As I say, I'm slightly worried by a lack of design input that's going on, but that is countered by plenty of other examples.
But let's say, I think I was watching one of your talks from maybe, let's say, I think it was 6 or 7 or 8 years ago, and you said something like, now is the time. Now you saw it as a very positive moment in the development of magazines, and you said something like, like obviously when I was younger, people would think that was the time when magazines were in their heyday, but actually it's now that we are able to do some things that were never achievable before. And so that was like 6 years ago. So I wonder, you could maybe at least could compare that time. Where were we 6 years ago, and where were we 30 years ago?
Well, I think we're going through the same. I think it's still a great time. it's a you know, from a creative standpoint, it's a golden age. There are so many options. It's, you know, we're talking on laptops, and the power of this laptop is exactly the same power that any sort of so-called big mainstream professional magazine publisher has on their desk. So the access to the means of production is more transparent than ever, is more accessible than ever. So, you know, the issues around all the different bits and parts of the process that used to be quite separate and needed different agencies and different companies and different, everything's wrapped up in this one machine now, one program, or, you know, one process of production, which has its costs in capital outlay and in practice, but actually once you have it, you have it. So then, you know, the space of process is open for you to do what you want to do. And lots of people are trying, and inevitably, just as in any kind of creative activity, some people are doing some awful stuff, in my view. But there's lots of brilliant stuff, and I think that's just, you know, I think there's an awful lot talked about the way that the magazine industry is diminished in scale, and there's less of it around, and there's magazines, of course, are far less central to our media diet. They're far less present in our day-to-day experience. For most people, they are. But I think there's also people from that so-called 80s, 90s heyday are prone to a nostalgia for something which actually was rather mundane and certainly commoditized. It got increasingly commoditized, and creatively whilst there were some brilliant practitioners doing some occasionally clever stuff, most of it was pretty repetitive and, you know, not so exciting. I think now we're in a much more exciting environment where people are in control of their own projects and able to take them where they want them to be taken, which is fabulous. But it's also it doesn't automatically mean that everything that people produce is brilliant. People have different ideas of aesthetic, and both visual aesthetic and verbal aesthetic, and we get people go in different directions. But in terms of what's possible, it's a fantastic time, and there are plenty of examples of magazines which are creatively excellent, who are making things that are far better than were being produced 30 years ago. So I feel very positive at the moment. Yes, the challenge is the financial side.
Mm-hmm. In what way?
Making things that are sustainable. You know, we at magCulture, we have a whole range of magazines, around about 700 in stock, and a lot of them just about cover their costs. But that's as far, the publishers behind them are very happy with that. Some of them are very successful businesses, and but this is the huge turn we've seen from super successful businesses who are scared to do anything too different or directional because they didn't want to lose their business, to a situation where people can largely do what they want, and then, you know, hopefully they'll cover the cost of the printing. They're not bringing in tons of advertising like the old business model. It's not about that. It's about being passionate about what you're trying to achieve, and publishing material and hoping you find your audience.
So in some way, it's the audience that is presumably the core to a successful magazine.
Well, if you take a step back, I mean, any magazine at any period doesn't exist until they have a reader. So the audience has always been and always will be absolutely core to it. It's without it. But it's more so now, because I think instead of producing magazines that go on the newsstand on every high street in every city across the country, across the world, and not really being concerned with finding an audience that regularly buy your magazine, but instead trying to persuade somebody to buy your magazine that day, that month, and then next month's another issue, another problem. I mean, issue not in terms of a magazine issue, but issue as in problem. Next month we'll have to try again and get. Well, what the magazines today are doing is building an audience where there's loyalty, and they have they have a much smaller audience, but the audience is much more dedicated and involved in the community around which the magazine exists, has created.
But there is a certain paradox here, because to start a magazine, you almost need to envision the audience, or the audience has to exist. But then to sustain a magazine, that audience needs to kind of assemble itself or sustain itself. Or find the magazine. So in a way, to start a magazine, you need to find the audience. But when you start a magazine, the audience needs to find you. So there is a real kind of art, probably, in building a community. And I wonder what insights do you have in that?
I think we're talking about publishing programs which are much smaller than they were 30 years ago. So you could, and I always kind of encourage people looking to start stuff, they start small and build from there. That's one thing. The other thing alongside that is using using social media and other marketing formats to start building an audience before you even move to print. So you and for all the the whole digital well, I can't say it. I'm allergic to it. The whole
digital space.
Yeah, the digital space is so complex, and its effects on print have been so complex. But one thing that I think regularly gets overlooked is that the new generation of independent magazines has largely come about because of digital channels. That's how they build their audience. That's how they reach their audience. And things like Instagram and TikTok, Instagram though in particular, have been enormously, and I say have been. I mean, the question is, will they continue to be as the algorithm gets more and more bent and distorted and less helpful? But one, magazines look great on that channel, and two, it is, in a sense, social media is about building a community, and that's what magazines do. So they work very strongly and successfully in parallel. So whilst digital in the broadest sense has devastated so much of print publishing, and definitely shifted it from being the taken over its position, not taken over, but diminished its position as a central part of what we rely on for information and everything. In terms of the world of magazines that I'm interested in, and we specialise here at magCulture, digital has been an absolute power.
What's really interesting to observe is, with the emergence of AI, I was reading how much the visits to many magazine websites or magazine forum online have dropped because it's the algorithm is now reading for you, and it's giving you these summaries and so on. And especially even big platforms like the design platform, they say that their visits to their archival material, which has often been a really important source of traffic for them, has dropped massively because people are not searching web in the same way that they used to like a year ago. And it's now really AI that are reading the article.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, of course, that's happening across the web. It's not just publishing, but yeah.
But what's interesting is that to perhaps, I don't know whether that may bring something positive to the print. Printing matter then perhaps can be seen in all its glory as something that is an explorative cinematic experience in space and time. It's maybe interesting to think about whether there is a renewed value.
I think this is something that predates AI. I think that definitely the new generation of magazines are a response to the repetitiveness of the online experience. the use of screens. We all rely on them for everything, for so much, but I think people, an increasing number of people, a significant minority of people, are looking for alternative ways to experience things that don't rely on Wi-Fi, and that's been happening for some time, and I think that's definitely confounded people's expectations.
And Jeremy, this was something that we discussed at the forum, at the publishing forum at the Architectural Association. Quite a few people that were there were also putting it in number terms. And not that I ever have conversations about people's businesses and numbers, but I wonder whether your numbers in magCulture are actually also supporting this claim that people are going back to or really wanting to engage more deeply with the printed matter.
Well, I mean, magCulture's been around for 20 years. I've been following what I term the new generation of independent magazines now for 25 years. The shop's been around for 10 years. Across the 10 years of the shop, we've just seen an ever-increasing number of people that want to be involved in the act of production in terms of actually making magazines. And we've seen, both supply and demand increase. So there's more magazines and there's more people wanting to buy them. I don't have cold, hard figures, but the fact that the shop has, we launched the shop in 2015 without any real sense of business plan or retail experience or anything. And 10 years later, we're bigger and stronger, and it's still in a very similar mode to launching a magazine of your own. You're sort of living from payment to payment, but it's, the amount we're selling now is significantly more than we were selling 10 years ago. And the amount that we're being offered is significantly, in terms of new publications and people wanting to do stuff. I do think the pandemic helped that made, I think that an awful lot was said about how, the pandemic, the lockdowns, we're never going to go back to it. It's going to be a whole different world. Well, it's not. Well, it's a different world in many ways. We didn't think it was going to be, in negative ways. But I think one thing that I think people have woken up the idea that screens aren't the answer. They have a function and they have a role. They're not going anywhere. But it's not the be all and end all. And people want to do something different. People want stuff. They want to have actual sort of physical, tangible things. And magazines fulfill that very nicely. There's something people can enjoy, they can learn from, they can refer back to. People save them now, they collect them. So as I said, I think a significant minority of people are very empowered by them.
I mean, I guess from an architect's point of view, they're also objects. I mean, it's so beautiful to hold a beautiful object, be it a cup or be it a piece of
but that's and I think it's an irony of in some respects one of the most beautiful objects are these things, but the interaction you have with the printed magazine as an object is it's a multi-sensory experience of smell and touch and sight and noise or audio, sound. And that experience is a very, very powerful one that, I think there are some things like this that we just get to take for granted. And we sort of shift away from them and think, oh, actually, and then you re-experience it, and then you rediscover and you relearn what was special about it in the first place, and what is lacking in our digital world. People, I just think people enjoy, as you say, the physical object, and that's a key part of the new generation of magazines is the physicality of them, the sort of visceral nature of they are not just weekly throwaway gossip magazines. These are if you want works of art in their own right,
I guess we've been speaking in very general terms, but I wonder whether there are any examples that really inspired you recently. Anything that you've seen, specific pieces of, again, printed matter that you thought, oh, this is really new kind of experience, perhaps.
I think there's a whole range of magazines that have some of which have been around for some time. And then there are sort of more one-off types of things. There's I've got a bunch, and I was preparing a talk here. I think there's a number of quite large format American magazines that I have a lot of time for, which are sort of tabloid on not particularly luscious or special paper, but their scale. I mean,
bring it if you.
Well, so I think. This isn't. I didn't have this to hand deliberately because we're talking about architecture, but I'm sure you know this magazine.
Yes, I do. Yes,
and the scale of it, and that. I think a lot of people think of the new generation of independent magazines as being all about big, heavy paper, quite bookish and quite heavy, and deliberately kind of made to be treated with large respect and put on a bookshelf and everything. But a magazine like this, there's another one called the Whitney Review of New Writing, which is a similar format. But I love the sort of. I mean, it's, in one sense, it's just paper. There's a sort of certain functionality to it. But I really enjoy that, and the fact it's just two color. And yet they've managed to kind of find a role for it. It's very, as you know, it's very text orientated. It is about the read.
Yeah,
there's enough going on here in terms of their use of the rat mascot, the NIRAT, the actual kind of basic print quality. I think it speaks. It's just right for now. It just speaks to the moment. I think that that takes us into another realm of magazines, and the role that they have is to reflect the times they're made in. And I think that and the Whitney Review of New Writing does a similar thing. It's just very kind of just no nonsense, not overthought, but intelligently templated and formed.
I guess they even draw that logic from mainstream magazines like, The Economist or London Review of Books. But I
think in relation to both those publications, they are more they're more designed. I think that's the important part. There are things there are things here that irritate some people, but the logo is back slanted, and that's something that every single italic throughout the magazine it goes the wrong way. It doesn't go the way that italics mean. So it's got its own perversities, its own little and habits. And the thing with the rats and the two color and the Whitney Review of New Writing does a similar thing, and insofar as it's a magazine about writing, so all it has is writing. There are no images at all in it. There are no pictures of authors. There are no book covers. It's just text. But they make it. The design works really hard to make something of that. They have their own little bunch of tools they do to make the pages come to life. But they have a certain, both those magazines, and there are other examples, have I guess you could take those, but in a way, both of those could go back to something like Real Review.
Yes.
Which I'm sure, I don't know whether you crossed that when you were talking with the guys from OKRM, because they originally conceived the design for that. But there's a sort of taking a simple format and making something special of it.
And building in the economy of dissemination, of even like posting it.
No, absolutely. Well, yeah. There are plenty of examples. There are plenty of stories. Plenty of magazines that have been created with all the craft in the world, and then when they actually come to post it, it can't afford to post it. There's the whole practical side. I'm not sure how practical actually this scale is in terms of posting. I don't know whether when the magazine posts them out, whether they get folded. So it's not perfect in that sense, but it is a more what's the word? I don't know. There's a sense of realism, about the whole effort that goes into it.
And if we now expand back to magCulture, and you say how over the last 10 years with the shop existing, demand has grown, or you've seen a kind of growth and development, presumably it's also development of your audience. You might be that you're also being able to formulate or articulate a niche or an audience, and they know where they go. They want to find certain things. How much of your effort goes into that, into sustaining and nourishing the niche that is interested in all these different things?
A lot. I mean, we're not a retail space that just exists to show people what's there and let them take what they want. I mean, from the very beginning, the space that we had was conceived as somewhere that we could hold events. And I'll come back to the events in a minute. But it's conceived as having, all the magazines are shown in full on the shelves. And so in a sense, there's a sort of gallery element to it. People are encouraged to come in and have a look. There are comfortable seats for people to sit down and read. We encourage people to browse. So it is a kind of showroom as well as a shop in that sense, I guess. We're very definite. It is a shop. We call it a shop. It's not, but it has other roles in that sense. It encourages people. We encourage people to come in and look at what we have. And in that sense, it's sort of become a public space, and this was something I kind of had some sense of conception of how the shop might work, but it genuinely surprised me how having a public space, having a shop becomes a public space. A shop becomes a space into which, especially with such a kind of specific single item product on sale. We don't sell anything else but magazines. It's become a kind of I don't know, all those words, a center, a hub, a sort of a place. It's certainly as a shop, it's a destination that people who love magazines come to. And we foster that. We work hard to foster that by encouraging people to be interested. We take time with customers. We take time with publishers that come in with their magazines. When people first start publishing, they often don't have a distributor or don't have a way to get to market, and they'll go around the shops that might sell their magazine or that they hope will sell their magazine. And a lot of them will say, well, no, we can't take it directly from you. You have to go through one of these distributors. We'll take stuff direct from, especially at the beginning. We sort of understand that, the first 1, 2, 3 issues, it's very small what you're doing, and they just need an outlet. So we'll give people that outlet and help them and encourage them. We get sent lots and lots of submissions, people wanting us to sell their magazine, and we don't take them all. Some of them, just aren't right for whatever reason, but we'll always feed back. It's not a very efficient process. I'm sat here, just next to me here is their shop manager, Bella, and she's busy with doing what she's doing, probably interrupting her work by doing this, but in between us, there's a big pile of magazines that we have to review. We have to go through, and we will go through, and everyone will get a comment, even if we don't take it. They'll get feedback from us. So we try to, we'll try and explain why we don't take something, and then encourage them to send us back the next issue. And then we do events. We do talks in the shop. We do a couple of conferences each year, which are off-site in other places. One in New York and one in London. And perhaps the most important thing around all that is that we do events with students. So the events we do with magazine publishers are generally in the evening after hours, and they're paid for just to not because we don't make money from them, but it just in London you have to get people to pay for a ticket in order for them to commit and not go for a drink instead. We do those, but then we also started a few years ago doing. We got asked by 1 or 2 universities, can you give a talk about what you do and about these magazines? And so we do that. The shop opens at 11 o'clock in the morning, and from about this week, as the universities reopen, we'll be doing at least one session a week with a group from between 10 and 11, where I give a talk and a question and answer session to people from journalism school, design school, fashion, marketing, promotion, photography. I mean, from London, from the UK, and from abroad, and they're very popular and they get very booked up. So we work really, really hard to encourage more than we're not just about selling the magazines. We're about trying to create this community and encourage the future.
Well, I mean, it's in the name, isn't it? Culture. That's the
I mean, culture. It's magCulture, and we love magazines, is what we say, and we're investing in magazine culture. Yeah.
I guess I remember, this is probably before I discovered magCulture, but I remember being in Japan and seeing usually men at lunchtime in financial district of Tokyo. You see them standing in front of magazine racks and reading magazines. And I remember very distinctly that I had that strong sense of, wow, Japan is really a magazine culture. You never see the scene like this anywhere else in the world. And so I guess there can be a magazine culture. And I just wonder whether, where do you draw those inspirations, or have you, what is magazine culture for you, or do you see it, or have you seen it somewhere? Or I guess you might have seen it in the 80s, actually. Probably there was a magazine culture that was really prevalent in the culture, but I wonder how you think about that. And
I think that the culture of magazines is very different today to what it was. But I do think, there was my beginnings in magazine that came about through, it was the sort of 80s, late 70s, 80s, and it was through my interest in and passion for music. I would buy the NME every week, New Musical Express, as a black and white tabloid, and it was the only way I could find out about the music that I wanted to see. That this was not what, and it wasn't particularly. I mean, it was just so not mainstream, and it was very still. These magazines were selling hundreds of thousands of copies, but it was still regarded as quite counterculture, and the punk era and the new wave and everything. That it was not. It was not in the newspapers unless it was some schlock horror thing about the Sex Pistols. And it was not on the radio, and it was not on TV. It was not anywhere, and all the channels were very, very limited. So magazines were the outlet for that, and that's where I first encountered proper magazine culture. It was just magazines with a vehicle, and the content was the culture, and it was vital. There was, and it was. I used to give a talk called "The Enemy Was My Facebook." And that's what it was. That's how I organised my social life, was seeing what band was playing where on Saturday and knowing who I'd see there. And then you went through the style magazines, Face, Blitz and ID, and they were again quite counterculture to begin with, but then they got very quickly, and this inevitably got subsumed into mainstream. And now today, youth culture and pop culture and all these various aspects, insofar as they exist as separate items today, are everywhere. It's just so in a sense that 80s era of magazine culture is now very much the mainstream kind of discourse, but it's not in print. It's now that whole area of culture is just what we drown in online. So magazines have to find a new role. And that's what they're finding. That's what they're developing. And in a sense, they're going back to what they were 50 or 60 or 70 or 80 years ago, and being more about As I say, much less about a sort of promiscuous occasional purchase and more about a really, really focused, dedicated audience who are as obsessed as the editors are about the subject in hand.
And I very much enjoy this link to space, that there is a spatial aspect that is very important. People coming and reading or standing and reading, that seems to be a really key part of the culture that actually is in space, it's physical.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think, it's hard. It can be hard keeping everything going.
Yeah.
And at times we've had to consider, well, maybe this work online rather than having a physical shop, and you quickly pull yourself up short. It's absurd. The whole point of this shop is that it's a real space, as you say, that you walk into and feel comfortable in, and you're with fellow travelers, people who are share your love for what's happening, and you also know that you're going to probably overhear conversations amongst publishers and meet some of the people from the magazines and feel part of a community of like-minded people. But yes, there's that absolute basic fact of picking up a magazine and standing there and using it.
And I don't know whether it was Walter Benjamin or who said that, or maybe Warburg, that the book that you're coming to find in a library is not the one you're looking for, but the one that's next to it. And I think what's beautiful in the magCulture shop is that there's that quantity of magazines.
Absolutely, and then there's two parts to that. I was in Amsterdam recently, where there's a brilliant magazine shop called the Athenaeum, and I know Mark Robberbund that runs that, and I was actually they were running an event, and I was involved in the event. We were talking there about part of it is about quantity, the volume of different titles that you have, and that you can come. You might be looking for magazine X, but you're going to find magazine A, B, C, and Y. But also the other part to do with kind of volume and quantity is having more than one copy. Having a stack of magazines is a very powerful thing. And you take the top one and there's another one. It's the same one, but it's kind of the repeat pattern of the same front cover again and again is a very powerful part of the thing. And if you only have like 2 copies on the shelf, it's much harder to sell that than if you have a pile of 20. It's a curious thing. And Mark the Athenaeum found the same thing. The point is, it sort of takes you back to the fact of production. These might be limited edition. There might only be 2,000, but they come off the line one after the other one, which itself is a beautiful thing to watch, is seeing the finished magazines coming off the conveyor belt and go into the packing boxes and stuff. But that it's the sort of emphasizes that these aren't one-off items. They are, it's your one, and there are another 19 there, and 19 other people are going to be doing the same thing after you.
Well, it goes back to this idea of community, which perhaps is the central idea.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with this magazine. This is a book that kind of has, it's a Japanese magazine called Super Photo Magazine. Mm-hmm. And I think it really is a kind of pornographic, probably underaged girls among the images. But the reason why I find it interesting is that within this magazine, artist Gunpei Akasegawa started to put images of odd urban fragments that have been abandoned and had no purpose. And they were just in the magazine and became seen as a type of art. So then he said these odd objects in the city are not just art, they're hyper art. And he's inviting other readers of the magazine to send them their observations. And so in this process of observing and inviting others to observe, and everything is channeled through the pages of the magazine that is already a niche magazine, a whole new like culture of observation emerges, and I think eventually becomes important in the sphere of architecture. I mean, at least in my small sphere of architecture, where these kind of fragments of cities are actually valued as seen as almost like artifacts of development of cities and so on and so on. But what is fascinating, and only later I discovered that this Hyperart Thomason, this book, actually came from, it's a collection of excerpts from a pornographic magazine. And when I discovered that, I was really amazed, because I was like, wow, so the magazine was a vehicle for an even further niche to emerge and to have an impact on a completely different level. I just find that really fascinating.
But I think that this is a key part of magazines as well, is the way that the material is gathered. Whether you're asking for submissions or whatever process, or whether you're going out into the world and meeting people and asking people questions, whether it's as simple as what's in your shoulder bag, or you're collating material. But the point, but it's real life encounters that are then assembled and represented in a real life object. And I think that whole part, so much, the whole kind of, what I was saying about social media earlier as being, the positive side in terms of publishing, but there's also just this, by taking a photograph of something, like take the examples of the random urban items that you mentioned, taking photographs like that and just putting it on Instagram just wouldn't be the same. It's just whereas that artist has collected, I don't know, hundreds of these objects and is now asking other people to contribute, but I expect it's probably got 200 and has only published 50. I don't know, but there's a sort of process of sifting and working and living with them and realizing what they are, rather than just slapping them on Instagram. And it's a very different kind of process of mediation.
Yeah, and I guess magazine being a space, right? Yeah. Which is kind of has an appearance, but then anything can happen within that space.
Yeah. But you just have to go back to the etymology of the word magazine. There's all sorts of wonderful kind of allusions. I love the fact that the French word for shop is magasin. And they're both from the same root. They're both kind of storehouses, collections of materials. They're spaces. Yeah, absolutely. I often refer to the shop as being a magazine in a sense. It's an editorial project. It's a curation of things that adds up to a thing in its own right. But very, very down with that. The idea of it of a magazine as being a space. Absolutely. There's one of the first things I did when I first started engaging more actively in the kind of role of and questioning what the role of a magazine was I can't remember. I think it was the book that magCulture's name came from a book that I published in 2003. Before that, I did another book called Issues in 2001. I can't remember which one it was I'm referring to, but there was a magazine in there. I can't remember what it was called, but it was an art magazine that was based around a gallery. I think it was in Germany, and each issue they used the magazine space to reflect the gallery space, and not in a literal way, but they worked really hard to bring to take on the kind of magazine stroke catalogue role of the print piece and link it really kind of viscerally in literally how do I explain, kind of mapping, not a diagram,
but more of an emotional
gallery in the works in the gallery into the pages of the magazine. I'm very interested in that. Very interested in that side of it. And I think the more you can think away from a magazine being 100 pages of A4 print bound on the left, and think more of it as a device to explain things in whatever way way to explain that thing is.
But there's also something in your interest in, let's say, magazine as opposed to book.
Mm-hmm.
Magazine is different to book, and I guess
well, the magazine's never finished. It comes out in finite chunks, but you know, a book has to be perfect. A book has to be as finished as possible, and before it is published, it has to reach a magazine. Obviously, everybody involved wants it to be as perfect and as finished as possible, but you have to get it done, because you've got to move on to the next one. There's another one to come, and that, you know, that drives perhaps flaws and imperfection in one sense, but underscoring that is the fact that then you've got issue 2 and issue 3, and you can make it better again. You can keep improving it and developing it and taking it to new places.
But there's also something about commitment, right? Because I think magazine implies commitment. Book is, you don't need to be particularly committed.
I guess, yeah. There's but ultimately, I think it's about being a periodical. You're part of a series. And one of my favorite examples of that was Pop-Up Magazine. US, which was a live magazine. It was a show that would roll into town. It would consist of several speakers talking their articles or performing their articles. But the only way you ever experienced it was a live show. It never existed in print. That last, I think, about 4 or 5 years. The COVID pandemic killed it off because events weren't possible. But during its life, and since when I've talked to people about it, some people just refuse to accept that's a magazine. I'm very clear that was a magazine. It was a part of a series, and it delivered content. It used dance and music and projections as you would use photography and typography and illustration to bring stories to life.
So I guess magazine implies a framework that is reappropriated and evolving, and that it has that time component.
Yes, I think the perpetually evolving is the key to it, and that's just one of the things I love about them. When I've been involved sort of full-time producing magazines in the past, that's been the most enjoyable thing is learning from one issue where you can take the next issue. And I think they should evolve. I think they should develop and adapt, and not just kind of stay the same and then every 3 years have a complete redesign. They should be actually organically changing and developing, reacting to that latest content, reacting to the latest context into which they're publishing. I
mean, there is a cinematic quality. When we were talking about the difference between book and a magazine, I was also thinking of the difference between film and TV series. But actually, with TV series, even though it was seen in the 90s as a kind of lower level of entertainment, but actually what it allowed was a kind of an observation of a life, like a much deeper engagement with a character than what a film allows within 2 or 3 hours
at time. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think this again is an important. You know, I think it does relate to magazines as far as it's not everything has to be brilliant and revelatory. You need the down points and the sort of slightly, annoying characterization of somebody, but it doesn't, it doesn't all have to be about pushing the story forward. It can be about just slowing down and letting you reflect on what you've just experienced, and just, I think this is something that the digital world is really, really guilty of and bad at, is giving people space to reflect. It's not they're bad at, they deliberately avoid space for reflection.
Yeah,
that's what we need, and I think alongside that, I'm very enthusiastic about friction.
Yeah,
about annoying people sometimes about interrupting things in an unnecessary manner, but just, not for everything just to be a smooth, slick, click. And you're right. I think magazines have a longevity in their periodicity to, the cadence can keep taking you back to it, and you've got time to. I think in fact, even more so, I think than the TV series film analogy is good, but I think it's even more the case in magazines that what the cinematic kind of experience has more in common with the book, in the sense that you're expected to experience it all.
Yeah.
If you miss an episode, you're going to probably miss some key points of the whole thing, if you know what I mean. But a magazine, very few people sit down and read every single word in the magazine. And that's part of it, is that they expect to find some stuff that they're going to be really interested in, but there's also going to be stuff they just flick past, think, that's not for me. And
I guess another thing is that magazine is reacting to the world as well as being a reaction. This is what I'm really fascinated. It's kind of bringing the world in, but it also generates the world. It kind of generates what's relevant, but it only does it by picking up things that are already in the world. I find that really one of the most fascinating aspects.
And I think alongside that, there's the element of sometimes not quite knowing what you've picked up on, or not knowing necessarily the relevance of what you've picked up on, but it's something, you publish something and you're kind of interested, but you're not quite sure what, and then by making it concrete in the space, you allow people to investigate it for themselves and reflect on it, both the readers but also the people behind the magazine.
It sounds like an intuition, like almost like magazine has to have an intuition, because there isn't always to why something is there.
Yeah, no, but that, and again, I think that intuition is a good word, but I think it's just not the algorithm.
Yeah,
it's a personal assimilation of ideas and things, and sometimes it's wrong.
Yeah,
sometimes it's not, or rather, it's not right for everyone. That's the point, and I think that is something for all the sort of sense that the early internet and the early digital ideals were all around being for everyone and everything and being open, and actually it's everything's closing down. Everything's the positive sense of personalized information has long disappeared. It's no longer, well, I don't think it ever was positive, but it's now very much a negative. Whereas in a magazine, there's space for you to find stuff that you didn't know you wanted.
Yeah, and I guess when we were talking at the publishing forum at the AA, when we were talking to Tom Ravenscroft, who's the editor of the zine, which often is kind of slammed as something that's destroying architectural culture or design culture, but at the same time, it's a very important piece of it's a very important.
People are annoyed by its success.
Yeah. But what was interesting is that he said that the zine was founded as a reaction to gatekeeping in design magazine publishing. And Marcus, who founded it, was like, well, I actually want to allow people to publish. And this is it goes back to what you just said about digital space being this kind of space of freedom. In comparison to maybe printed space being space that is often perceived as privileged, maybe, or kind of space that has to be gate kept or so on. So, do you acknowledge that?
Yeah. I think that there's many issues of privilege around it, but I think I don't have a problem with gatekeeping. I think you need gatekeepers. The problem with gatekeeping is that so many of the gatekeepers are the same people.
Yeah.
I think you need. I'd much rather be being sort of directed or led or influenced by people who I knew who they were, and I kind of might not like them, but I kind of know how I feel and trust about them, than by some sort of random algorithm.
Yeah.
The early days of user-generated content were bright and happy and very naive, and they did present an alternative, but that's not really there anymore. I think the theory behind Instagram remains brilliant in terms of, you can have your own feed and you can put out whatever you want. And if you build an audience, that's great. But we all know that not everybody that follows you gets shown the stuff that you're publishing. So at which point that's even worse than publishing something in a magazine and just...
And not knowing, I mean,
the context is
not the context.
You understand it, and I do think that on a personal level, within your relationship with the magazine, you build an understanding of what you like and dislike about the people involved in it, and you don't have to. It's not like you all have to be best friends and hang out together. You can, there are so many people, to use your example, that criticize Dezeen, but it's still very successful, and there's people that might be unhappy with aspects of it, but they rely on it, and it might have started off with some sort of sense of not gatekeeping, but it's very much a gatekeeper now. I resist the idea that gatekeeping per se is bad. I think it can be very bad, and I think it can be very negative, but I think there's something positive to it as well, as long as people are straightforward about what they're doing. It's a hell of a lot more straightforward than a random thing coming out of Silicon Valley.
I mean, you're the second person in a week that I think we're now starting this new discursive thread. You're the second person that said that in the week. I spoke to Eddie Heathcote, who is the architecture critic of the Financial Times, and he agrees with you. I think it's given me a lot to think about. I mean, I think the question is, what are the gates and what are they for, and what are these communities and niche? Because actually it's a niche, and we should value niches, because that's exactly what you're creating a platform. Each magazine is a little space that has a door and a window, and
absolutely. I mean, I literally use that language when I'm talking about the shop. Every single front cover is a window into another world, and that world is being gatekept by someone or somebody, some people. And I think, there are gatekeeping is an issue when it's Rupert Murdoch or that level of interference in terms of directing the world.
Yeah. And when it's damaging the culture, when it's actually
damaging the culture and the environment, and that it's damaging everything that we value. But I think even to an extent, I mean, it's interesting. You talk about Dezeen and the way that that it was set up as an alternative to the then perceived gatekeeping, and inevitably you reach a certain level in it, then you are not just gatekeeping, but being criticised for the level of gatekeeping. But there's 700 magazines just over the shelf here in the shop, and everybody involved in those could be accused of gatekeeping, but gatekeeping itself isn't a negative or a positive term. It's how you act it and how you fulfill it, how you